The morning started like any other Tuesday for Captain James Wright. He'd been flying cargo planes across the South Pacific for the past 15 years, and honestly, he could probably do this route with his eyes closed. Not that he would, of course. But when you've flown the same path hundreds of times, you start to notice when something's different. And that morning, something was definitely different. James was hauling supplies from Fiji to American Samoa, a routine trip that usually took about 4 hours. His co-pilot, Lisa, was going through the usual checks when James spotted it. At first, he thought maybe it was just a cloud, or perhaps his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no, there it was again, a thin line of smoke rising straight up into the clear blue sky. The weird part? That smoke was coming from Tavarua Minor, a small island that nobody had lived on for over 30 years. James knew this because he'd actually read about it once during a layover. Back in 1987, there was some volcanic activity that made everyone evacuate. After that, the government declared it off limits. The waters around it were too dangerous and the ground was too unstable. It became one of those places that people just forgot about. James leaned forward in his seat, squinting at the smoke. "Lisa, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" he asked. Lisa grabbed the binoculars and looked down at the island. "Yeah, that's definitely smoke. You think maybe it's the volcano acting up again?" "I don't know," James said, already reaching for the radio. "But that smoke looks controlled. Like someone made a fire on purpose." He radioed the Coast Guard right away. It took a few minutes, but they finally responded. No, they didn't have anyone authorized on that island. No, they hadn't received any distress signals. And no, there shouldn't be anyone down there at all. The officer on the radio told James to note the location and continue his route. Someone would check it out later. James acknowledged the message, but something didn't sit right with him. Later could mean hours, maybe even days. If someone was down there, they might not have hours. He'd heard too many stories about people lost at sea, about rescue missions that came just a little too late. He wasn't about to add another story to that list. "We're going lower," he told Lisa. She looked at him with wide eyes. "James, they said to continue the route." "I know what they said. But if that's a person down there, I need to see it with my own eyes." Lisa didn't argue. She'd been flying with James long enough to know that once he made up his mind about something, that was it. She just gripped her seat a little tighter as James brought the plane down, circling the island at a lower altitude. That's when they saw it. Carved into the white sand of the beach, in letters that must have been at least 10 feet tall, was the word SOS. And next to it, jumping and waving with both arms raised high, was a person. From this distance, James couldn't make out much detail, but the desperation in those movements was clear as day. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered. "There's really someone down there." James felt his heart pounding in his chest. His training told him to radio this in and wait for proper rescue. His cargo schedule told him he was already behind. But his gut told him something different. That person had been waiting for help, and help had just arrived. "I'm landing," James said. "What? James, are you crazy? We don't know if that beach is even long enough. We don't know the ground conditions. I know," James cut her off. "But look at them, Lisa. Look how thin they are. How desperate. We might be their only chance." The decision was made. James circled one more time, studying the beach carefully. It was going to be tight, really tight. The sand looked firm enough, probably packed down by years of tides. He'd landed in worse conditions before, though never deliberately and never this far from help if something went wrong. As he lined up for approach, James noticed his hands were shaking slightly. 15 years of flying, and this was definitely the most reckless thing he'd ever done. He could lose his license for this. Heck, he could lose a lot more than his license if this landing went badly. But when he looked down and saw that person still waving, still hoping, he knew he couldn't just fly away. The landing was rough. The plane bounced hard once, then twice, and James fought with the controls to keep them straight. Sand sprayed up on both sides as they skidded along the beach. For a terrifying moment, James thought they were going to run out of beach and crash into the rocks. But the plane finally shuddered to a stop with maybe 50 feet to spare. James and Lisa sat there for a moment, breathing hard, both of them probably thinking about how close that was. Then James unbuckled his seatbelt. "Come on, let's go see who we just risked our lives for." They grabbed the emergency kit and some water bottles before opening the door. The tropical heat hit them immediately, along with the smell of salt and smoke. As they jogged toward the figure on the beach, James could see it was a woman. She was incredibly thin, her skin dark from sun exposure, and she was wearing clothes that looked like they'd been patched together from different materials. The woman took a few steps toward them, and then her legs just gave out. She collapsed onto the sand before they could reach her. James and Lisa ran the last few yards, dropping to their knees beside her. "It's okay," James said, lifting her head gently. "We've got you. You're safe now." Lisa opened a water bottle and held it to the woman's cracked lips. "Small sips," she said softly. "Just small sips." The woman drank desperately, and James had to pull the bottle back to stop her from making herself sick. They moved her into the shade of the plane's wing, and slowly, very slowly, she seemed to regain some strength. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse and scratchy, like she hadn't used it in a very long time. At first, the words didn't make any sense. She was speaking, but it sounded like fragments, half-sentences that didn't connect. James and Lisa just kept giving her water and trying to keep her calm. Then the woman grabbed James's arm with surprising strength. Her eyes focused on his face, and she spoke clearly for the first time. "Thank God you came. I've been here since the tsunami. Since 2004. James felt like someone had just punched him in the stomach. He looked at Lisa, and he could see the same shock on her face. It was 2023. This woman was saying she'd been stranded on this island for 19 years. That couldn't be possible. Could it? James stared at the woman, trying to process what she'd just said. 19 years. That was almost 2 decades. He'd barely been flying for 15 years, and that felt like a lifetime. This woman was claiming she'd been alone on this forgotten island since 2004. "I'm sorry," James said carefully. "Did you say 2004? The woman nodded weakly, her eyes filling with tears. "The tsunami. December 2004. You remember it, right? Please tell me you remember it." Of course James remembered. Everyone remembered the Indian Ocean tsunami. It was one of the worst natural disasters in modern history. But that was in Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka. This was the South Pacific, thousands of miles away. Lisa must have been thinking the same thing. "But that tsunami didn't hit here," she said gently. "This area wasn't affected." "I know," the woman said, her voice getting stronger now. "We weren't from here. My team and we were marine biologists. We'd chartered a boat to study the coral reefs around these islands. We were actually anchored near Tavarua Minor when the tsunami waves reached the Pacific. They weren't as big as in the Indian Ocean, but out here in open water, they were strong enough." She paused to drink more water, and James noticed her hands were shaking. "Our boat capsized. I remember being underwater, being tossed around like I was in a washing machine. When I finally surfaced, I was alone. The boat was gone. My colleagues were gone. I just grabbed onto a piece of debris and held on." "And you washed up here?" Lisa asked, eventually. "I don't even know how long I was in the water. Hours, maybe. I remember the current pulling me, and then I hit the rocks near the shore. Hard." She gestured to her left leg. "Broke my leg in 3 places. Probably some ribs, too. I barely managed to crawl up onto the beach before I passed out." James felt a chill run down his spine despite the tropical heat. This woman had survived something that should have killed her 10 times over. "But 19 years, he said. "How did you survive that long alone?" For the first time, something like a smile crossed the woman's face. "It was sad and tired, but it was there. This island saved me. I know everyone thinks it's dead and dangerous, but they're wrong. Come on, I'll show you. If you can walk, that is. It's not far." James and Lisa helped her to her feet. She limped badly, favoring her left leg, and James could see it had healed crooked. Without proper medical care, broken bones would do that. They walked slowly, following her away from the beach and into the interior of the island. "By the way," the woman said as they walked, "I'm Dr. Helen Vasquez. I guess I should have started with that. It's been so long since I've introduced myself to anyone, I almost forgot how." "James, right. This is Lisa Chen, we're cargo pilots." "Cargo pilots," Helen repeated like she was testing out the words. "You know, I used to dream about who would find me. Sometimes it was a Navy ship, sometimes it was scientists. But cargo pilots landing on the beach? Never imagined that one." She laughed, and it sounded rusty, like she was out of practice. As they pushed through some thick vegetation, James started to notice something strange. This island was supposed to be barren, mostly volcanic rock with little plant life. But here everything was green. Really green. The plants were dense and lush, and he could hear birds singing somewhere nearby. "I don't understand," Lisa said, voicing what James was thinking. The report said this island was basically dead. Volcanic soil. No fresh water. unsafe for habitation. The reports were wrong, Helen said simply. Or rather, they were looking in the wrong places. The outer areas of the island, what you can see from a plane or a boat, yeah, those parts are pretty dead. But here, inland, protected by the volcanic crater, there's something incredible. They climbed over some rocks and suddenly the landscape opened up before them. James stopped walking, his mouth falling open. In front of them was a hidden valley, a perfect bowl carved into the center of the island. And it was like stepping into a completely different world. A small waterfall cascaded down one side of the crater wall, feeding into a clear pool below. Around the water, plants grew in wild abundance. James could see what looked like fruit trees, thick bushes full of berries, and gardens of vegetables laid out in neat rows. A shelter made from wood and palm fronds stood near the water, and nearby was a rack where fish were drying in the sun. "Welcome to my home," Helen said quietly. "It's not much, but it kept me alive." Lisa walked forward slowly, taking it all in. "This is impossible. How is there fresh water here? How is anything growing?" "The volcano," Helen explained. "I'm not a geologist, but from what I could figure out, there's an underground spring system connected to the volcanic chambers. The water comes up naturally filtered and clean. The crater walls protect this valley from the worst of the storms and they trap moisture. It creates its own little climate. It's perfect for life." James walked over to the gardens. The vegetables looked healthy and well-maintained. "You planted all this?" "Not at first. When I washed up here, I was barely alive. For the first few months, I survived on coconuts, fish I could catch in the tidal pools and rainwater. But then I started exploring. I found this valley and I found something else too. Seeds." "Seeds?" Lisa asked. "From my research equipment." We'd brought seed samples for a different project. They were in a waterproof container that washed up a few weeks after I did. It was like a gift from the universe. I planted them and they grew. Over the years, I've cultivated this whole garden. The fruit trees took forever, but they eventually produced. I learned to fish with spears I made from bamboo. I collected rainwater and fresh water from the spring. I survived. James looked around at everything Helen had built. It was impressive, sure, but it was also heartbreaking. No one should have to survive like this. "Helen," he said carefully, "why didn't you try to signal for help sooner? Why wait 19 years? Helen's face darkened. "You think I didn't try? For the first 5 years, I tried everything. I spelled out SOS with rocks at least a dozen times. But ships never came close enough to see. Planes flew over, but too high to notice. And fires," she shuddered. "I learned the hard way that fire on this island is dangerous." "What happened?" Lisa asked. "In 2009, I lit a signal fire on the beach. A big one. I thought for sure someone would see it. But the wind changed and blew sparks into the dry vegetation. It started a fire that spread toward the valley. I barely managed to put it out before it reached here, before it destroyed everything I'd built. After that, I was terrified to light fires. This valley, these plants, this water, they were keeping me alive. I couldn't risk losing them." "But you lit a fire today," James said. Helen nodded, her eyes filling with tears again. "Because the island is dying. Over the past few months, the earthquakes have been getting worse. The spring is producing less water. The ground shakes almost every day now. I think the volcano is waking up again. I realized that if I didn't take the risk now, I might not get another chance. So I gambled. I lit the fire, carved the SOS in the sand, and I prayed someone would see it before the volcano took everything." She looked at James and Lisa, and her voice cracked. "You have no idea how many times I dreamed about this moment. About someone finally finding me. About going home. But now that you're here, now that it's real, I don't even know if I remember how to be around people anymore." James put a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, one step at a time, okay? Right now, let's focus on getting you off this island and getting you home." But even as he said it, James could feel a tremor beneath his feet. Subtle, but definitely there. Helen was right. This volcano was waking up, and they needed to move fast. James felt another tremor ripple through the ground, stronger this time. A few small rocks tumbled down from the crater wall, splashing into the pool below. He exchanged a worried glance with Lisa. They needed to get Helen out of here, and they needed to do it now. "Okay," James said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We should head back to the plane and radio for a proper rescue team." But Helen grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Wait, you don't understand? I can't just leave. Not yet. Helen, the volcano. I know about the volcano. She cut him off. But look around you. Really look. This isn't just about me anymore. James wasn't sure what she meant at first. Then he started paying closer attention to his surroundings. The birds he'd heard earlier, they didn't sound like any birds he'd heard before. Their songs were different, unique. He looked closer at the plants in the garden, and now that he was really examining them, some of them looked strange too. Unusual leaf patterns, flowers he'd never seen. Helen walked over to a small tree with bright blue fruit. See this? This species doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. I've checked my research materials 1,000 times. These birds? She pointed to a small, colorful bird perched on a branch. They're found nowhere else. This entire valley is like a time capsule of evolution. Species that developed here in complete isolation for thousands of years. Lisa walked closer to examine the bird. Are you saying these are undiscovered species? Not just undiscovered, Helen said, her voice filled with passion. Irreplaceable. When this volcano erupts, and it will erupt, everything here will be destroyed. These birds, these plants, these insects, all of them will go extinct. Gone forever, unless we do something about it. James ran his hand through his hair, feeling the weight of what Helen was telling them. This was way bigger than a simple rescue mission. Helen, I hear what you're saying, but we're cargo pilots. We're not scientists or wildlife experts. We don't have the equipment or authority to— I have documentation, Helen interrupted, limping quickly toward her shelter. 19 years of documentation. Come here, let me show you. Against his better judgment, James followed her. Inside the shelter, he was amazed by what he saw. The walls were covered with drawings and notes, all made with charcoal and plant-based inks on pieces of bark and palm leaves. There were detailed sketches of birds, insects, plants, even fish from the surrounding waters. Helen had created an entire scientific archive using nothing but the materials around her. She pulled out a stack of bark sheets, each one covered in neat handwriting. I've recorded everything. Species descriptions, behavioral patterns, breeding cycles, population estimates. I've mapped the entire ecosystem. It's all here. Lisa picked up one of the sheets, studying the detailed drawings. This is incredible work, Helen. But how are we supposed to save all of this? We have a cargo plane, not a research vessel. I don't know, Helen admitted, and for the first time she looked truly defeated. I've been alone for so long I've lost touch with how the world works now. What's possible, what's not. I just know that if someone doesn't help, all of this dies with the volcano. Another tremor shook the ground, this one lasting several seconds. A crack appeared in the crater wall, and James could see steam starting to rise from it. They were running out of time. All right, here's what we're going to do, James said, making a decision. Helen, grab whatever documentation you can carry. Your most important research. Lisa, help her gather some samples, seeds, anything small we can take. I'm going back to the plane to radio this in. We need experts here, and we need them fast. James, we are already behind schedule, Lisa reminded him. If we don't deliver this cargo, then we don't deliver it, James said firmly. Some things are more important than a schedule. This is one of them. He jogged back through the vegetation toward the beach, his mind racing. As soon as he reached the plane, he got on the radio and started making calls. First the Coast Guard, then the nearest research station, then anyone else he could think of. At first, people were skeptical. A woman stranded for 19 years? Undiscovered species? It sounded crazy. But James kept pushing, kept explaining, kept demanding that someone listen. Finally, he got through to Dr. Robert Chen, a biologist at the University of Auckland who'd been studying Pacific Island ecosystems. The man listened to James's story, asked a few sharp questions, and then said the words James had been hoping to hear. I'm getting on a boat right now. We'll be there in 12 hours. But 12 hours might be too long. The tremors were getting more frequent, and James could now see smoke rising from multiple points on the island. The volcano wasn't just waking up. It was getting ready to blow. When James returned to the valley, he found Helen and Lisa surrounded by small bags and containers. They'd collected seeds, plant cuttings, even a few small bird eggs carefully wrapped in cloth. Helen had her bark documents bundled together, tied with woven grass rope. Scientists are coming, James announced. 12 hours, but I don't think we have that long. As if to prove his point, a massive tremor hit. This one was different from the others. It felt deep, powerful, like the whole island was shifting. The pool water sloshed violently and several trees swayed dangerously. When it finally stopped, they could hear a new sound. a low rumbling coming from deep underground. "We need to leave," Lisa said urgently. "Right now." But Helen was looking around the valley with tears streaming down her face. "This has been my home for 19 years. I learned every plant, every bird call, every inch of this place. It saved my life, and now I have to watch it die." James understood her pain, but they didn't have time for goodbyes. "Helen, the best way to honor this place is to make sure the world knows it existed. Your research can do that, but only if we get you and that research out of here alive." Helen nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "You're right. Let's go." They gathered everything they could carry and started making their way back toward the beach. But they'd barely made it halfway when they heard it. A sound like thunder, but it wasn't coming from the sky. It was coming from the volcano itself. James turned and saw smoke and ash beginning to pour from the crater. "Run!" he shouted. They ran, Helen limping as fast as she could between James and Lisa. Behind them they could hear rocks beginning to fall, trees crashing down. The volcano was erupting, and they were right in its path. When they finally burst through the vegetation onto the beach, James's heart sank. The tide had come in while they were gone. The waves were now lapping at the plane's wheels. If the water got much higher, they wouldn't be able to take off. The sand would be too soft, the wheels would bog down. "Get Helen in the plane," James yelled to Lisa. "Start the pre-flight check. We're leaving in 2 minutes whether we're ready or not." As Lisa helped Helen toward the plane, James looked back at the island one last time. Smoke and ash were billowing into the sky now, and he could see orange glows of lava beginning to appear near the crater. This island, this hidden paradise that had kept Helen alive for 19 years, was destroying itself. And somewhere out there in the ocean, help was coming. But it was going to be 12 hours too late. James just hoped they could save enough to make a difference. He ran for the plane, knowing that the hardest part of this rescue was just beginning. James jumped into the pilot's seat and started flipping switches, his hands moving on autopilot while his mind raced. The engines coughed to life, and he could feel the plane settling deeper into the wet sand. This was going to be close. Too close. "Lisa, how's Helen?" he called back. "Secured and breathing," Lisa replied, sliding into the co-pilot seat. "But James, look at the sand." "We're sinking. I know. We're going now." James didn't wait for a full pre-flight check. There wasn't time. He pushed the throttle forward and the engines roared. The plane lurched but didn't move forward. The wheels were stuck in the wet sand, spinning uselessly. "Come on," James muttered through gritted teeth. He eased back on the throttle, then pushed forward again, trying to rock the plane free. Behind them he could hear rumbling getting louder. Ash was starting to fall like dark snow on the windscreen. The plane rocked backward, then forward, and suddenly they were moving. Slowly at first, agonizingly slow, but moving. The engine screamed as James pushed them harder than he should have. The beach wasn't long enough for a normal takeoff, and with the wet sand dragging at them, they needed every bit of speed they could get. "We're not going to make it," Lisa said, staring at the rocks at the end of the beach. "Yes, we are," James said, but he wasn't sure he believed it. The plane picked up speed, bouncing hard over the uneven sand. James could see the rocks getting closer. He pulled back on the yoke, willing the plane into the air. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then he felt it, that subtle shift as the wheels left the ground. They were airborne, barely. The plane skimmed over the rocks with maybe 5 feet to spare. James heard Helen gasp from the back, but he couldn't look away from the controls. They were flying, but they weren't stable yet. The plane wobbled dangerously as ash and debris buffeted them from below. "Climb, climb, climb," Lisa urged, watching the altimeter. James was trying, but the air around the volcano was chaotic. Hot gases rising from the eruption created turbulence that tossed the small plane around like a toy. He fought with the controls, every muscle in his arms straining. Finally, they broke through the worst of it and leveled out. For a moment, nobody spoke. They just sat there breathing hard, processing the fact that they were alive. Then Helen's voice came from the back, quiet and broken. "It's gone. My home is gone." James glanced back and saw her pressed against the window, staring down at the island. Even from up here, they could see lava flowing down the crater walls into the valley. The trees were burning. The pool was probably already buried under ash and rock. Everything Helen had built over 19 years was disappearing before their eyes. "I'm sorry," James said, and he meant it. Helen didn't respond. She just kept staring until the island disappeared behind them. The flight back should have been a relief, but instead it felt heavy. James radioed ahead to let people know they were coming in with a survivor. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By the time they landed in Fiji, there were ambulances, reporters, government officials, and what looked like half the island waiting for them. Helen was immediately taken to the hospital. James tried to go with her to make sure she was okay, but officials pulled him aside. They had questions. A lot of questions. How did he find her? Why did he land without authorization? What about his cargo? What about the volcanic eruption? The next 72 hours were a blur. James's boss was furious about the abandoned cargo and the unauthorized landing. The aviation board launched an investigation. Some people called James a hero. Others called him reckless. The story went viral on social media, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about what he should or shouldn't have done. But James wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about Helen and the island. He'd gotten Dr. Chen's contact information before everything went crazy, and he called him every few hours for updates. The news wasn't good. Dr. Chen's team had arrived at the island 12 hours after the eruption started, just like they'd promised. But there was nothing left to study. The valley was completely buried under lava and ash. The unique ecosystem that had survived for thousands of years was gone in a matter of hours. "What about the samples we brought back?" James asked. "The seeds and the research Helen did?" "We're analyzing everything," Dr. Chen said. "Her documentation is remarkable, truly. But without living specimens, without the habitat, it's going to be nearly impossible to preserve these species. We can try to grow the plants from seeds, but the birds, the insects, most of the ecosystem, it's just gone." James felt sick. They'd saved Helen, but they'd failed to save what mattered most to her. On the third day, James finally got permission to visit Helen in the hospital. He found her in a private room hooked up to IVs and monitors. She looked small in the hospital bed, more fragile than she'd seemed on the island, but her eyes were alert when he walked in. "Hey," James said, pulling up a chair. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Helen said with a weak smile. "The doctors say I'm severely malnourished, dehydrated, and I have about a dozen different deficiencies they're working on fixing. Oh, and my leg needs to be rebroken and set properly. So living the dream." "I'm sorry we couldn't save more from the island," James said quietly. "Dr. Chen told me." "I know," Helen interrupted. "I've been watching the news. Everyone's talking about the lost ecosystem, the extinct species. They're calling it a tragedy." She paused, looking out the window. "And it is. But you know what? I'm alive. For 19 years I thought I'd die on that island. I made peace with it. But you changed that. You saw smoke and you came down. You risked your life, your career, everything. For me, that's not nothing. Still," James said, "if we'd moved faster, if I'd called for help sooner." "Stop," Helen said firmly. "You did everything right. The volcano didn't care about our timeline. This was always going to happen." She reached over and took his hand. "You gave me my life back. My family thinks I've been dead for 19 years. I have a sister, nieces, and nephews I've never met. And now I get to see them again. Because of you." James felt his throat tighten. He hadn't let himself think about the emotional side of this. He'd been so focused on the logistics, the investigation, the failure to save the ecosystem. "There's something else," Helen said. "I've been talking to Dr. Chen and some other scientists. They want me to work with them. Use my research to document what existed on that island. They think we might be able to recreate some of the plant species from the seeds we saved. It won't be the same as the original ecosystem, but it's something. It's a legacy." Before James could respond, there was a commotion in the hallway. Raised voices, people arguing. A moment later, a woman burst into the room, followed by several nurses trying to stop her. The woman stopped dead when she saw Helen. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Elena, oh my God, Elena, is that really you?" Helen's eyes went wide. "Maria?" The woman rushed forward and the two of them embraced, both crying. James stood up, feeling like he was intruding on something private. "I'll give you some time," he said, heading for the door. "James, wait," Helen called out. She pulled back from the woman, Maria, who James realized must be her sister. "Maria, this is James Wright. He's the pilot who found me. He saved my life." Maria turned to James, tears streaming down her face, and pulled him into a fierce hug. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for bringing my sister home." James hugged her back, and for the first time since the rescue, He felt like maybe he'd done the right thing after all. The island was gone. The unique species were gone. But Helen was here. She was alive. She had family who loved her. Sometimes that had to be enough. 3 months later, James found himself sitting in a hearing room, waiting to learn if he still had a pilot's license. The aviation board had been investigating his unauthorized landing for weeks, and today, they'd finally make their decision. His lawyer seemed confident, but James wasn't so sure. The hearing officer, a stern woman named Patricia, looked over her glasses at him. "Captain Wright, you violated multiple protocols. You landed without clearance on restricted territory. You abandoned your cargo. You put yourself, your co-pilot, and your aircraft at risk. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" James stood up. He'd rehearsed a speech with his lawyer, something formal and apologetic. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out. "I'd do it again," he said simply. "If I saw that smoke and that SOS, I'd land again. Every single time. Because that's what pilots are supposed to do. We're supposed to help people." Patricia's expression didn't change. "The board will deliberate and announce our decision shortly." While he waited, James checked his phone. There was a message from Helen. She'd been released from the hospital 2 weeks ago and was staying with her sister while she recovered and adjusted to life in the modern world. She sent him updates every few days, little things about experiencing technology she'd missed, foods she'd forgotten about, moments with her family. This message just said, "Good luck today. You'll be fine." "I know it," James smiled. Helen had more faith in him than he had in himself. "Captain Wright." Patricia called him back into the room. "The board has reached a decision." James stood, his heart pounding. "Your actions were unorthodox and violated standard procedures," Patricia said. "However, given the extraordinary circumstances and the fact that your decision resulted in saving a life, the board has decided to issue a formal reprimand rather than suspend your license. You'll be required to complete additional safety training, but you can continue flying." James felt his knees go weak with relief. "Thank you. Don't make us regret this decision, Captain." "I won't." Outside the hearing room, Lisa was waiting for him. She'd been called as a witness and had backed up his story completely, even though it had put her own career at risk too. "So?" she asked. "We're good," James said, grinning. "Still pilots. Thank God, I was not ready to start a new career." She punched his arm lightly. "Don't ever scare me like that again. No promises. You know me." "Unfortunately, I do." They walked out into the sunshine, and James felt lighter than he had in months. His phone rang. It was Dr. Chen. "James, I have news," the scientist said, excitement clear in his voice. "The seeds Helen brought back? 3 of the plant species have successfully germinated. We're growing them in a controlled environment. It's early, but we think we can keep them alive." "That's incredible," James said. "There's more." "We've been analyzing Helen's documentation, and based on her detailed observations, we've been able to publish several papers about the lost ecosystem. The scientific community is calling it one of the most important ecological discoveries of the decade. Helen's work is changing how we think about island evolution and isolated ecosystems." After the call ended, James felt something he hadn't felt since the rescue. Hope. The island was gone, but its legacy wasn't. Helen had made sure of that. A few weeks later, Helen invited James to a special event. She'd been working with Dr. Chen and several conservation organizations to create something she called the Island Legacy Project. The goal was to study and protect vulnerable island ecosystems before they were lost to volcanic activity, climate change, or other threats. The event was being held at the University of Auckland, where they'd set up a small botanical garden with the surviving plant species from Helen's Island. James arrived early and found Helen standing in the garden, staring at a small tree with blue fruit, just like the one she'd shown him in the valley. "Hard to believe it's the same species, isn't it?" James said, walking up beside her. Helen turned, and he was struck by how different she looked. She'd gained weight, her skin had healed, and she was wearing modern clothes. But it was more than that. She looked at peace in a way she hadn't on the island. "It's strange," Helen said. "I spent 19 years protecting that ecosystem, living in it, becoming part of it. And now it exists in this tiny garden, completely dependent on us to survive. It's like we traded places. The island kept me alive, and now I have to keep it alive." "Seems fair," James said. Helen laughed. "I suppose it does." She paused, then said, "You know, people keep asking me about those 19 years. They want to know how I survived, what I felt, if I went crazy from loneliness. And the truth is, some days I did feel crazy. Some days I wanted to give up. But I learned something important out there. What's that? That survival isn't about being strong all the time. It's about finding reasons to keep going. For years, my reason was the island itself. Taking care of it, studying it, protecting it. It gave me purpose. And now I have a new purpose. Making sure the world remembers what existed there. Making sure other islands don't suffer the same fate. Before James could respond, he heard someone call his name. He turned and saw an older man approaching with a woman and two teenagers. Helen's face lit up. "James, this is my family. Maria you met at the hospital. This is her husband Carlos and their kids, Sophie and Miguel." The teenagers looked at James with wide eyes. "You're the pilot," Sophie said. "The one who saved Aunt Helen." "I just did what anyone would do," James said. "No," Carlos said firmly. "Most people would have followed the rules and kept flying. You chose to be brave. That matters." The ceremony started soon after. Helen gave a speech about the island, about conservation, about the importance of protecting vulnerable ecosystems. She showed photos from her bark documentation, beautiful detailed drawings that amazed the audience. When she talked about the moment she saw James's plane circling overhead, her voice cracked with emotion. "For 19 years I thought I'd been forgotten," she said. "But Captain Wright proved that there are still people who care, who take risks to help others. He gave me my life back, and now it's my responsibility to make that life count." After the ceremony, as people mingled in the garden, James found himself standing alone for a moment, just watching. He saw Helen laughing with her niece, showing her one of the plants. He saw Dr. Chen excitedly explaining something to a group of students. He saw Lisa chatting with Maria about what life was like in the 2000s versus now. James thought about that morning 3 months ago when he'd spotted smoke on an empty island. He'd made a split-second decision that had changed everything. It had almost cost him his career. It hadn't saved the island, but it had saved Helen. And through her, it had sparked something bigger than either of them. Sometimes the right choice isn't the safe one. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts and hope for the best. A year later, James received an invitation to Helen's wedding. She was marrying a fellow scientist she'd met through the Island Legacy Project. The invitation included a note. "You gave me a second chance at life. Now I'm taking it. Thank you for everything. Your friend always, Helen." James looked at the invitation and smiled. He RSVP'd yes. On his next flight, as James soared over the Pacific, he found himself looking down at the islands below. He thought about all the hidden valleys and secret ecosystems that might exist down there, unknown and unprotected. He thought about Helen and the legacy she was building. He thought about how one decision, one moment of courage, can ripple outward in ways you never expect. The island where Helen had survived was gone now, completely buried under volcanic rock. But its spirit lived on in her work, in the plants they'd saved, in the awareness she'd raised. And every time James flew this route, he'd remember the smoke, the SOS in the sand, and the woman who'd survived the impossible. Some stories don't end with everything being saved. Sometimes survival is messy and complicated, with both loss and hope mixed together. But Helen was alive. She was home. She was making a difference. And really, James thought as he guided his plane through the clouds, that was more than enough. That was everything.